Thank you to Darlene for reading and to Aaron for filming. This morning, I'm continuing with the series on tuning up to 10, looking at the 10 commandments, and believe it or not, we're already at number 8, which is, thou shalt not steal. Let us pray. And now may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God, our strength and our light. Amen. Guy's walking along the road and comes across a little girl selling cupcakes at a cupcake stand. So he stops and he buys one, and he eats it in front of her, enjoying every bite. He then tells her how good it was, and then he asks her, "It must be hard sitting here with all these delicious cupcakes. Are you ever tempted to eat them?" "Oh, no," she said, "that would be stealing. I just licked them and put them back." Thou shalt not steal. Now, as I said in the teaser at the opening of the service, of all the 10 commandments, this is the commandment that we actually get the most wrong. And I'll explain why in a moment, but let's just take a couple of minutes and look at it the way that we normally do on the surface. Thou shalt not steal. That's a lesson that most of us learned when we were about this high, maybe even the hard way. And for the most part, I'm sure we've all done a pretty good job of following it. Or have we? So let me ask you a personal question. Have you ever stolen anything? Come on, be honest. Ever been tempted to put a pack of gum in your pocket without paying for it? Or maybe you once bought a ball home from the park that you found that didn't belong to you. Have you ever received too much change at a restaurant and rather than alert the server, you just put it in your pocket and decided, well, her mistake was your good fortune? You ever parked at a parking meter without putting money in it? Or kept a library book that should have been returned long ago? Have you ever downloaded a song that you didn't pay for? Or watched a pirated movie that a friend got for you? Have you ever passed off someone's quote or poem or idea as your own? When we first think of stealing, we think of big things like stealing a car or breaking into somebody's home. And we say to ourselves, well, of course I don't steal. But when you broaden that idea out and out and out, it's hard to imagine that any of us have gone through life without stealing something. Maybe without really even thinking about what we were doing. Are there any Harry Potter fans out there? Perhaps you remember this little verse. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. For those who take but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned, beware of finding more than treasure there. I'm going to tell you a secret, and you'll probably lose all respect for me after you hear it, but that's okay. Maybe you didn't even have that much to start with. So, I do steal. I steal pens. And I know right now our administrator, Catherine, and our former administrator, Ashley, are hearing that, and they're just laughing because they know that only too well. Lots of pens around the office have gone missing over the years. But generally, I steal them from one place specifically, and that's Adam's Funeral Home here in Barrie. They have the nicest black pens I have ever used with their insignia on them. Whenever I do a funeral, there's always one of these pens sitting on the clergy desk so that I can make notes, and I use it to make notes, and then I stick it in my pocket, and off I go. Now, to be fair, just so you don't really think I'm a kleptomaniac, Doug Adams, who is the owner of the funeral home and who is also a good friend, he knows I do this. And he jokes about how he's going to have to close the funeral home because he has to spend so much money on pens because so many of them go missing. Anyway, there is another part to this story. I like these pens so much, and they are so reliable, that I use them whenever a couple gets married and they have to sign the documents. I use them because they're really good black pens, but I don't mind admitting that it tickles my funny bone to know that they are signing their marriage license with a pen from a funeral home. At some level, it kind of amuses me. And I've been doing this for 14 years, and not a single couple has ever noticed it or said anything about it. So here's the lesson. If you ask me to officiate at your wedding, you better bring your own pen. See, now you've probably lost all respect for me. Now, I'm just having fun with this topic, but in all seriousness, stealing is never a victimless crime. And even though I'm sure none of us would think of hot wiring a car or breaking into somebody's home to take their TV, there are more subtle but still serious ways that average people like you and I can and do steal. One thing that concerns me and has done for a while is the stealing of people's intellectual or creative property via the internet. I think in our modern, digital, connected, wired world, stealing has taken on a new reality because we can get so much for free. I worry that we risk undermining our most creative people. Every good society needs its songwriters and storytellers, its singers and its sages. With the ability now to download almost everything on the internet, important revenue is being lost that should be going to our most creative people. Remember the old days when a new album would come out? You go out to Sam the Record Man or HMV and you'd buy the record or the CD, and you would know that some of the money you were spending is going to that artist. Do you remember even the smell of taking that record out and taking it out of that crinkly sleeve? Man, I'm so old. But today, when we hear a song that we like, we can click a button on our mouse, and if we dig hard enough, we can probably find it for free and put it into our phones. No money spent, and we feel good about saving a buck. The point is, there is a cost to what we see as convenience and our good fortune. People who tell our stories and sing our songs, they're very valuable to us. They feed the heart and soul of our nation. And so when we take their stuff without paying for it, we are devaluing their contribution. Illegal downloading may be an anonymous crime. It is not a victimless one. And we owe it to those people not to do it. Feel guilty? Maybe that's good. Okay, I'm not going to preach down to you. We all know the consequences of taking things that are not ours. And if the only way that we ever interpreted this commandment was as a moral imperative against taking someone's property that's not ours, if it makes us think twice about returning the change or filling the parking meter or paying for the song that we download or returning the pen, then it's a good thing. So if this commandment was simply a moral imperative against taking what is not ours, it would still be very valuable. But that's not what this is about. It actually goes much deeper than that. So here we go. What is the eighth commandment really all about? Well, think of this. All of the 10 commandments have one thing in common. They were all considered capital crimes to the ancient Israelites for whom these commandments were written, meaning they all carried the punishment of death for breaking them. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt worship only one God. Could all be punished and were punished with death. And yes, even the smaller ones like honor your mother and father and keep the Sabbath holy, they too were codified in law as having the punishment of death, whether or not that was ever carried out. But stealing someone's property was not a capital crime amongst the ancient Israelites. If you took food from your neighbor or stole your other neighbor's livestock or grabbed that really nice walking stick that your neighbor had that you really loved, you could be punished and punished harshly, but you were not put to death. So why then would stealing be in the 10 Commandments if it didn't carry a death sentence? It's simple. We've got it wrong. We've misinterpreted what stealing in this context actually means. The Hebrew word that is used in thou shalt not steal refers not to stealing goods. It refers only to stealing people. The correct reading of this commandment is not thou shalt not steal. The correct reading of this commandment is thou shalt not steal people. In other words, thou shalt not kidnap. If you don't believe me, look it up. It's absolutely true. So that means that while it wasn't a capital crime to steal food or someone's belongings, it was very much a capital crime to steal their people. And that's because back then it happened. And it happened more than you may think. Remember, landowners in those times had servants and slaves. It was not uncommon for human beings who were in servitude to be taken from one property against their will and against the will of the landowner to another. This was a capital crime. And if you were caught, you would be sentenced to death. Hence, it is in the Ten Commandments. So what do you think of the eighth commandment now that you hear it for what it actually means? Thou shalt not kidnap. At first, maybe you're thinking, well, this is even less relevant to my life. I mean, who kidnaps people? Unless you're a hitman or part of the mob, you're not going to kidnap someone. And that's good. And hopefully it does make this commandment less relevant to our lives as we live them each day. But it's not about our lives. This commandment is about the lives of others. It's about the lives of the most vulnerable among us. And that makes this commandment hugely relevant to bigger issues in our world today and bigger issues in our country today. I hope you were as sickened and saddened and horrified by what came out of Kamloops this week as I was. I'm sure you were. While most of us were debating who was going to win the hockey game, the Leafs or the Habs, the bodies of 215 First Nations children were unearthed on the grounds of a residential school, buried there years ago with their parents never knowing what happened to them. I'm not going to get into the details. You can read about the details. And as one expert said this week, it may not be the last time this happens. There may be other mass graves at other residential schools. The history of residential schools in this country is a history of the systematic kidnapping of Indigenous children from their homes, herding them into government facilities that were de facto prisons, stripping them of their identity, forcing them to learn English and Christian values, often accompanied by abuse, neglect, and disease, and all overseen, run, sponsored, and endorsed by the mainline churches in Canada, including the United Church of Canada, and all funded by the Canadian government. This all happened for decades in the 1900s, the last one closing in 1996. All right here, in the midst of one of the most advanced countries on earth. I know this is heavy duty, but how ironic that the week that we address the commandment of stealing lives is the week that we are confronted what I believe is the greatest shame of our history as a nation. And I know talking about this makes you feel badly. It makes me feel badly. And to be a minister in one of the organizations that was behind this is sitting very heavily on my shoulders this week. I'll be very honest. One of the reasons that I'm so quick to embrace progressive Christianity is because of the residential school issue. I'm not interested in being part of any traditional Orthodox understanding of the faith that thinks it can inflict its will on others in such a cruel way, supporting what I believe is a very dangerous misreading of who Jesus was and what he was all about. We need a new way to understand and embrace and share and live our Christian ideals that honors Jesus' path of love, justice, and human dignity. Because we can never, ever let this happen again. A faith, a church that does not seek to protect its most vulnerable people and extend the hand of love to one another and seek healing and peace and shared ground with all peoples is not based on the life and philosophy of Jesus. And to suggest otherwise is to be complicit, even quietly complicit, in accepting systems that are ripe for prejudice and abuse. Jesus would never have let this happen. And for it to have happened in his name is an abomination. Also ironic, and again, I didn't plan it this way, but also ironic that we land on this commandment on the Sunday in which we celebrate the anniversary of becoming an affirming congregation. That was our attempt here at Northwest to right another wrong in the church, and that was the kidnapping of the identity and freedom by condemning those who had any sexual identity other than heterosexuality. One of the proudest moments of my ministry was June 5th, 2016, when we became affirming and officially became welcoming and accepting of all people. But let's broaden this out even more as we begin to dig into just how relevant this commandment is. Another modern issue that is perhaps the closest to what this commandment was originally trying to address is human trafficking, a huge and growing international problem. Human trafficking is the practice of coercing people against their will into work that they don't want to do, most often associated with the buying and selling of sex. And it is a huge human rights issue. According to the UN, there are some 40.3 million victims of human trafficking in the world, 75% of whom are women, 25% of whom are children. And it's not just a problem overseas. Just last March in Barrie, a man was arrested and charged with running a human trafficking ring right here in our city. Thou shalt not kidnap. Wow. Is this ever a relevant commandment for today? So where am I going with this? What does the residential school issue, pride, and human trafficking have in common? Where do they intersect? They are all issues of human worth, human dignity, and human value. Whether we are kidnapping somebody's body, or their will, or their identity, or their sexuality, or their culture, it's the same basic principle. We are kidnapping someone's basic self-worth or self-identity. And when you steal from someone their self-worth, you steal from them their ability to live a peaceful, productive, meaningful life. And surely, it should be the goal of any church or any organization, particularly ones that are founded on the life and philosophy of Jesus, to make darn sure that we are not on the wrong side of building, creating, and restoring human worth wherever it is threatened. You know, it's so easy for us today, particularly when it comes to the residential schools issue, for example, to say, yeah, but that's history. That's the past. We're not like that anymore, so why do we have to bring it up? Why do we have to feel badly for what others did a long time ago? We know better now. And there's a lot of truth in that statement. We do know better now. At least I hope that we do. And I'm proud of the example of the work of the United Church that's done to help restore broken relationships with our First Nations people. I'm proud of the apologies that we have made and the trust that we are working to restore. But if we are simply consigning injustices to the ignorance of those in the past who should have known better and didn't, are we really learning anything? And are we really changing anything? Or are we just congratulating ourselves by saying, well, at least it wasn't us? Oh, I need a drink of water. I believe that the greatest prophetic voice of Christianity in the modern era belongs to Martin Luther King Jr. I think we should spend more time really studying what this man taught and believed and shared and lived. This man understood and was able to articulate better than anyone else the heart and soul of faith. He gets it. And I want to share with you a couple of quotes from him that I think get to the heart of this issue. And I'm going to put them on the screen so you can read them too. Firstly, he said this: "We are not just makers of history. We are made by history." In other words, history isn't separate from us. We carry it. We live it. And if we're not careful, we repeat it. We can't ignore history because we don't like it or we find it distasteful, because we ultimately are the product of it. But even more than that, take a look at this quote. Again, this is Martin Luther King. "An individual has not started living until they can rise above the narrow confines of their individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity." That's a great quote. You know, I don't believe that there's value in carrying the shame of past injustices with us 24/7, walking around feeling badly and inadequate and powerless. We don't change the future by feeling badly about ourselves in the present. But we do change the future when we know the past and acknowledge the past, when we are honest with how human beings have treated each other, when we learn from it, when we let it stir us up, when we feel it deep in our humanity. We need to carry the lessons of the past with us, not to make us look down in shame, but to encourage us to lift our heads above the things that define us as individuals to the things that define us as a human species. Because life isn't about wanting what's best for me. It's about wanting what's best for us. Because when one rises, we all rise. When one sees the light grows stronger. When one heals, we all heal. Human trafficking, stealing someone's culture away from them, limiting someone's freedom of sexual expression may mean little to you as an individual. I hope it means everything to you as a human being. Because until we feel the pain and the isolation and fear of others deep within the fibers of our own being, we will never fully unlock the power of Jesus' message, which is to love without limit, to live without fear, and to fully realize the worth of every single human life. Jesus once said long ago, "Why do you heap up treasures on earth where they can rust and fall apart or be stolen? Instead, keep your treasures in heaven where they will be preserved." What did he mean by that? I think he means that when we come to the end of our life, the stuff we've accumulated won't add up to a hill of beans. As the old expression goes, you never see a hearse pulling a trailer. We can't take our stuff with us. But what remains is the legacy we have lived. And that legacy cannot be stolen by your neighbor. It cannot rust. It cannot be eaten by moths, even gypsy moths. Our legacy is the very sacred record of what we have done, who we have helped, what we have stood for, and how we have embraced and lived our faith. What you have in life will mean nothing when you are gone. What you have been in your life, that's the echo that keeps resounding long after you are gone. It truly is the eternal nature of each of us. That, to me, is what it means to store up treasures in heaven. It means to build your life on the things that will outlive your life. I read a simple little story recently that stayed with me, and let me just share it as we bring this all together today. This story supposedly happened nearly 100 years ago. Germany was experiencing one of its worst snowstorms in history. Snow waist deep swirled angrily in the raging wind. The temperature dropped dangerously below zero, causing flesh to freeze within minutes. Not realizing how bad the snowstorm had become, a man by the name of Oberlin, a very well-known and very wealthy captain of industry, started out on foot to his home near Strasbourg. Trudging through the deep snow, frozen to the bone, and unable to see his hand before his face in the blinding snow, Oberlin soon lost his way. Sinking deeper into the bottomless drift, Oberlin panicked. He could not move. His body was numb, and his screams became lost in the angry wind. Finally, he ceased to struggle and simply gave up, figuring he was going to die. Within a few yards of Oberlin, a farmer was checking his livestock and heard Oberlin's screams. The farmer rescued Oberlin from his snowy grave and carried him into a safe, warm farmhouse. Oberlin soon recovered. He thanked the farmer for saving his life and offered him a sizable reward, but the farmer refused the reward. "Well," said Oberlin, "at least tell me your name." The farmer smiled warmly and said, "I'll tell you my name, if you can tell me the name of the Good Samaritan." Oberlin thought for a moment and said, "I don't think his name was ever recorded." "You're right," said the farmer. "It never was. We are here to help each other, not for accolades. So let me just be known today as the Good Samaritan." This week, we were reminded again of the depravity of human nature. But it also means that we have hopefully been newly empowered and inspired to live out the best of human nature. Or again, as Martin Luther King said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that." Thou shalt not steal. It's still a good message about pens and piracy and parking meters, but it's an even better message about love and light and lifting up the worth of all those with whom we share our home. It's been a tough week, but now we get to choose. We can't change the past, but we are called to carry the past, to learn from the past, and then to use it to build a better future. Amen.